All right, so John Titor, the story, part 3, with your host, J Snip 4. Not really a host. You can just call me Bozo. That's okay too. So we were leaving off yesterday at where he says, don't eat or use products from any animal that is fed part of its own dead. The mad cow story here in this world line is yet to begin, but it will begin. Next question. Is it possible that sometime in your future that time travel will be commonplace? Yes, that is absolutely possible and eventual. Have any of the scientists of your timeline discovered any new planets, possibly ones with life? Not that I'm aware of. Has the bandwidth of the internet increased greatly? Yes. How does time travel affect future exploration of the universe? There is a great deal of debate about trying to use a distortion unit to travel to the moon. The experiment would require very precise calculations that would allow the VGL system to find a theoretical path to the moon on a different world line. The only problem is there is no way to communicate with anyone if the experiment should succeed. In other words, it's possible to do it, but only the people on the receiving end could take advantage of it. Is there still sporting event? I don't know why it was like blocked out, why it doesn't say what kind of a sporting event, but is there still a sporting event in 2036? Yes, we still play basketball, but I'm not a fan and can't comment on its organization. What are your memories of 2036? I remember 2036 very clearly. It is difficult to describe 2036 in detail without spending a great deal of time explaining why things are so different. And again, I think he kind of answered this before. In 2036, I live in Central Florida with my family, and I'm currently stationed at an Army base in Tampa. A world war in 2015 killed nearly 3 billion people. The people that survived grew closer together. Life is centered on the family and then the community. I cannot imagine living even a few hundred miles away from my parents. There is no large industrial complex creating masses of useless food and recreational items. Food and livestock are both grown and sold locally. People spend much more time reading and talking together face to face. Religion is taken seriously, and everyone can multiply and divide in their heads. Life has changed so much over my lifetime that it's hard to pin down a normal day. When I was 13, I was a soldier. As a teenager, I helped my dad haul cargo. I went to college when I was 31, and I was recruited to time travel shortly after that. Again, I suppose an average day in 2036 is like an average day on the farm. There is a civil war in the United States that starts in 2005. That conflict flares up and down for 10 years. In 2015, Russia launches a nuclear strike against the major cities in the United States, which is the other side of the civil war from my perspective, his enemy, China as well as Europe. They launch against them. The United States counterattacks. The U.S. cities are destroyed along with the American federal empire. Thus, we, in the country, won. The European Union and China were also destroyed. Russia is now our largest trading partner, and the capital of the U.S. was moved to Omaha, Nebraska. Hang on one second. I want to check something. Okay. One of the biggest reasons why food production is localized is because the environment is affected with disease and radiation. We are making huge strides in getting it cleaned up. Water is produced on a community level, and we do eat meat that we raise ourselves. After the war, early new communities gathered around the current universities. That's where the libraries were. I went to school at Fort UF, which is now called the University of Florida, on this world line. Not too much is different, except the military is a large part of people's lives, and we spend a great deal of time in the fields and farms at the university or fort. The Constitution was changed after the war. We have 5 presidents that are voted in and out on different term periods. The vice president is the president of the Senate, and they are voted separately. Why is time travel used? Right now it is used to get information or items that would be helpful in getting a post-World War III back to a normal condition. I am here for personal reasons. I was talking to my friend about this the other day, yesterday I think, because he remembers the old John Titor story, because I mentioned it to him when I first found it. And he was asking, well, if he had to go back to 1975 or whatever to get the computer, why is he in 1999, 2000, in early 2001? And I said, I thought it had something to do with him going back, but you know what? I thought maybe not. I said, I'm not sure. So that's interesting. I am here for personal reasons. For a few months now, I have been trying to alert anyone that would listen to the possibility of a civil war in the United States in 2005. Does that seem more likely now? Actually, it's quite amazing to see what's happening. I've been trying to get people to pay attention for the last few months, but to see it unfold is very interesting. Before I leave, I'll try to post my report. You assume I am here to start a war? Someone asked him that. Consider this. You are a time traveler who wishes to go back in time to 1941 because your grandparents lived close to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. You realize you can't stop the war, but you may be able to help them prepare for it. Strangely, December 7th comes and goes with no sneak attack. As the war in Europe rages on, Japan fails to join the Axis power. There is no war in the Pacific, and the United States remain neutral. Then you watch as Germany begins to develop the atom bomb, all by themselves. For a change, I have a question for you all. I want you to think very hard. What major disaster was expected and prepared for in the last year and a half that never happened? Now, I believe he's writing this in 2001 because, again, he stayed here up until March and was still commenting. And if you remember the Y2K thing, he talks in detail about that, and even hints at one time or another that he may have had something to do with it not happening. He got to the right people. Maybe his grandfather or uncle, whatever, worked for IBM. I don't know. I can only speculate. So he's saying that now. What major disaster was expected right now in this time, which was 2001? For the last year and a half, that never happened. Well, the answer is obviously Y2K. I remember that. And I remember seeing tons of contract jobs in the IT industry for people to go in and flash the BIOS of all these PCs, of all these big corporations. There was tons of contract work. I didn't want to do it because I didn't want a contract job. I wanted a regular job that I know I'd always get paid. I have a full-time job, not a contract for 6 months. So I do remember that, but it's interesting that he says that. As far as the war goes, I have faith you are quite capable of starting one all by yourself. I am hard-pressed to accept any criticism on my outlook on that subject. Growing up might have been a vastly different experience for me than it was for most of you. Personal responsibility, determination, honor, friendship, and self-reliance are not just words we try to live up to or fantasize about. On my world line, life is not easy. We live in a world recovering from years of war, poison, destruction, and hate. All of it courtesy of the thinking and actions of people that live right now in the same world you do, worrying about which stocks to buy or whether or not a stranger is lying to them on the internet. I believe that hardship and challenge develop character and community. My first experience with war came when I joined a shotgun infantry unit at the age of 13. In the 4 years I served as a rebel, I watched hundreds of people get shot, burn, and bleed to death. I know exactly where I was and every detail of that exact moment the first nuclear warheads began falling on Jacksonville. I know the pain and regret of not acting soon enough to enjoy a relationship as a loved one dies of brain cancer from a war that gained nothing. How can you possibly criticize me for any conflict that comes to you? I watch every day what you are doing as a society. While you sit by and watch your constitution being torn away from you, you willfully eat poisoned foods, buy manufactured products nobody needs, and turn an uncaring eye away from the millions of people suffering and dying all around you. Is this the universal law you subscribe to? Perhaps I should let you all in on a little secret. No one likes you in the future. This time period is looked at as being full of lazy, self-centered, civically ignorant sheep. Again, I gotta stop for a second. Keyword he used. I didn't make him write this, right? I'm not the time traveler guy pretending to make a story up or anything, right? Civically ignorant sheep. Well, what's civics, right? You learn about the law, the Constitution, civil rights, human rights, lawful rights. So he could have easily just said, this time period is looked on as being full of lazy, self-centered sheep. But he wanted to tell you exactly what the problem was. Civilly, we don't know what our laws are. We don't know what our freedoms are. We think we do. No one really cares. No one pays attention. When someone gets their rights violated, the rest of us, well, he should have just listened to what the cop said. Oh, he should have just put his face in the dirt for doing nothing besides taking a picture of something for photography. Well, yeah, if he would have listened, he would have saved himself all that trouble. No, bozo. He has civil rights. That's the beauty about living in this country with this Constitution. You can tell the police officer, no, that's an unlawful order. I'm taking a photograph. Go F off. But when they do that, the rest of the civically ignorant sheep get on that person's case. You should have just did what the cop said. Moron. Perhaps you should be less concerned about me and more concerned about that. I will strongly agree. Imagine you are Jewish and you are about to travel back in time to Germany in 1935. All around you are the patterns of thinking and action that will lead to a great deal of harm, death, and destruction in just a few years. You have the advantage of knowing what will come, but no one will listen to you. It's absurd. Germany, Hitler, Nazi, right? The Titanic's sinking. Absurd. It's an unsinkable ship. Maiden voyage, sank. So you have the advantage. Imagine having the advantage of knowing what will come, but no one will listen to you. In fact, they think you're insane, and the situations you describe could never happen. What I feel is not anger. It is sadness that you cannot see what I see. Again, I just have to think how important that full thing, that little piece I just read you, several paragraphs there. How important is that statement right now in 2013? Versus, put your mind and self back to 2000, 1999, 2000, around that time frame. And then I read that little paragraph to you. You would do exactly what he just said. You'd look at me like I'm some kind of moron. This could never happen here. I would have. I was a hell of a sheep. I was a hell of a sheep in 1999. Are you kidding me? What event started the war? Can it be stopped? The war is a result of faulty politics and desperation from Western leadership during the U.S. Civil War. Yes, I suppose you could stop it. Are some areas of the U.S. safer than others? Take a close look at the county-by-county voting map from the last elections. Now that I'm reading that, I remember that, and that always stuck in my mind. Of course, I've forgotten it now. Now that I'm reading it, it popped into me, but for years, I always remembered that. Are some areas safer than others? His only answer is not yes or no, other than take a close look at the county-by-county voting map from the last elections. So, year 2000. What he is saying is, if you can find the areas of least voting population or voting centers, that would more likely be the safest spot. So again, he talks about Jacksonville getting a nuke dropped on it, as well as pretty much every major city in the U.S. Would the voting population or the voting precincts, voting map of Jacksonville, Florida, be smaller or bigger than, say, Brandon, Florida, where I live? Obvious answer. So that's an interesting hint he gives out as to where you might feel a little safer. Were biological or chemical weapons used in the war? Were any weapons used that affected people's minds? Yes, there were biological and chemical weapons used. No mind control weapons, but there are new non-lethal weapon systems that turn out to be quite lethal. Let me stop. The old policeman's number one weapon right now. Nowadays, the taser. How many taser deaths? over the last few years have you started to hear about versus 1999, 2000, right? Non-lethal taser. That's what they describe it as, a non-lethal taser. Man killed, man dies of heart attack, young man dies, this guy dies, that guy dies. Shot in the head, dies with a taser, shot in the heart, chest, right? All over the damn place. Who does this bozo think he is saying that in the year 2000? What's wrong with him? What would you say to any world leaders who might be reading this right now? Again, he's answered this one. Revel in your confidence today because you will not win tomorrow. It almost seems like this is a double copy. Now, hold on. Yeah, now it's almost like it's mixed and matched a little bit here. I think Russia is still very likely attacked the U.S. with nuclear weapons. It's hard to imagine being here to see it. You are also correct, but I want to add a twist to your thinking. Russia's enemy in the United States is not you, the average person. Russia's enemy is the United States government. Does the current relationship between Arabs and Jews have anything to do with the coming war? Real disruptions in world events begin with the destabilization of the West as a result of degrading U.S. foreign policy and consistency. Oh my God, where are we at today? Egypt, Syria, Iraq is back in the news, bombs going off, right? Degrading U.S. foreign policy and consistency. This becomes apparent around 2004 as civil unrest develops near the next presidential election. The Jewish population in Israel is not prepared for a true offensive war. They are prepared for the ultimate defense. Wavering Western support for Israel is what gives Israel's neighbors the confidence to attack. The last resort of a defense of Israel and its offensive Arab neighbors is to use weapons of mass destruction. In the grand scheme of things, the war in the Middle East is a part of what's to come, not the cause. Does anything happen in 2012? We answered that in the other video, and he ends up saying, perhaps you are familiar with the story of the Red Sea and the Egyptians. How and why do the Arabs and Jews become entangled in the civil war of the USA? They are not directly involved, but political situations are dependent on Western stability, which collapses in 2005. So again, we are, as we know, and as I've mentioned already in the beginning of this series, all these dates pretty much have come and gone, except for a few, 2 or 3. But again, if there was some reason for him not telling us the true dates, or if he got involved in the Y2K thing, that completely set us off differently. Now we are definitely on a different path, yet all the same things and people in power still exist. So it's almost like we got a bunch of years in advance of go have fun and play, and now everything he's talking about is really starting to make sense because it's fixing to happen in the near future. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there for a thought. The Arab countries appear to have weapons of mass destruction. Do they use them against America? Not against America, but they are used against each other. Question says, young people should look forward to the future while older people don't see many days ahead of them. I think it's pointless for you to ask us to worry about politics if we are all doomed. He says, it saddens me that you do not realize your true worth as a keeper of information and experience. Perhaps the end that we fear will open your eyes to your true value as an individual. Young people need wisdom. The captain of the ship knows where the lifeboats are. I just saw another story today about the Russians moving nukes into the Balkans to thwart any future expansion by NATO. I also haven't heard anyone take me up on my information experiment on the IBM 5100 or check out the information I've given to you about the Unix failure in 2038. With all due respect, I find it hard to take some of you seriously. There was a point where he asked them, go see if you can find out and verify what I've told you about this IBM computer 5100, that it can read APL, Unix, and a few other languages. And the Unix has a failure with the time system, or I think the clock. Kind of like a Y2K thing, actually, I think. Something similar in 2038. So later on, I guess people started. It took him leaving, I think, before people finally was able to contact someone from IBM who actually knew about that 5100, and verified, yes, this is something was never published. It was something that no one knew about unless you worked right here in IBM. And even most of IBM didn't know about it. It was just a small core, division within IBM. But it was verified later. I can tell you that for sure. So he's saying, I've given you guys some questions, and you can't even give me a freaking answer. Here I am answering all your questions, and you can't even do me the favor and go verify what I've said. It's interesting. This is very interesting. What happens to... No, never mind. It's a person asking about himself. He says, I don't know about you, whatever. Again, the new capital is Omaha, Nebraska. Why are you so interested in the Constitution? After the war, the United States had split into 5 separate regions based on the various factors and military objectives they each had. There was a great deal of anger directed toward the federal government, and a revival of states' rights was becoming paramount. However, in their attempt to create an economic form of government, the political and military leaders at the time decided to hold one last constitutional congress in order to present a psychological cohesion from the old system. During this congress, the leaders discovered and decided that coming up with a new and better form of government was nearly impossible. The original Constitution itself was not the problem. It was the ignorance of the people that lived under it. So I want to go back to one thing he just said. There was a great deal of anger directed toward the federal government, and a revival of states' rights was becoming paramount. Did I not just hear, literally this week, from leaked documents from, was it the Department of Homeland Security or the DOD? It was on Alex Jones' website, InfoWars, that they are talking about anybody who talks about state rights is basically going to be looked at as a potential anarchist, terrorist, homegrown terrorist, right-winger. Government was now training that anyone that talks about that is basically an enemy. That just came out this week. So here's this sentence, again, written, 13 years ago. There was a great deal of anger directed toward the federal government, and a revival of states' rights was becoming paramount. And they ask him, don't you like your new constitution? From my viewpoint, it is very effective. I am a very strong believer in local or states' rights. Someone asked him, basically, you appear to be a libertarian who stresses the need for mankind to get back to basics. You also seem to be a gun rights activist. I suppose from your vantage point, that's a fair assessment. I would call myself more of a centrist. Although I understand gun rights issues here, I cannot relate to it at all, and it is a common point of argument with my mother. I keep saying her tune will change in about 10 years, and she'll be cleaning shotguns in her sleep, but it doesn't help. In other words, you may not want to get familiar with guns, but you fixin' to. If it makes you feel any better, I never shot anyone who wasn't trying to kill me. In the last few months, I have had numerous extended conversations online, and there are quite a few things I've said which can easily be checked out but haven't. I get no pleasure out of being right when it comes to the mad cow disease, war in the Middle East, or suffering people in faraway lands. There's nothing like the look on someone's face when you tell them 100,000 people will be dead tomorrow. In my travels, I have discovered that most people really don't want to know about the future, because if it's different than what they want, it ticks them off. And actually, I don't blame them. Someone says, I disapprove of war because I think it's immoral. What do you think? He says, I disapprove of murder. Man as a species is incapable of changing his nature through will alone, and war is a tool of biology. The ability for war sleeps in each one of us, and we must decide what we will do before the beast awakens. As for morality, again I point to the universal balance of good and evil. For every world line there is a peace. There is also a world line that has destroyed itself. I'm glad to see it so easy to dismiss the Middle East. Yes, I suppose it's a no-brainer, but pretty soon it will be a no armor and no legger. The year 2008 was a general date by which time everyone will realize the world they thought they were living in was over. The Civil War in the United States will start in 2004. I would describe it as having a Waco type of event every month that steadily gets worse. The conflict will consume everyone in the U.S. by 2012 and end in 2015 with a very short World War III. Now, I want to, again, I know the dates haven't made sense yet, but he says the year 2008 was a general date by which time everyone will realize the world they thought they were living in was over. What happened in 2008? Financial collapse, massive banker bailout, TARP fund. We had the NDAA shortly there, after this whole thing took effect. Right? The biggest bailout the world has ever seen. The United States, at $9 trillion at that moment, goes to $17 trillion in 5 years. And at that moment, while he's stepping out of office, Bush, and Obama stepping in, they raised the debt ceiling. 30 days later, they raise it again. By the end of the year, they raise it again. And then again. And then again. So while some of his dates look like trash, the fact that he says 2008 was a general date by which time everyone will realize the world they thought they were living in was over. The housing bubble, right? Everything. All these things you thought it was an illusion. In 2008, with the banker bailout, pretty much, in my opinion, opened that door to let everybody realize something ain't right. So that's interesting. We'll leave it at that. If you could change one thing about your government right now, what would it be? He says the United States is still a representative republic in 2036, but it was touch and go for a while. After the war, the U.S. divided into 5 general areas. We've also already read that part. If I knew someone was going to die, no. If they asked him if he knew someone was going to die and there was a chance he could stop it, he should have a moral obligation to do something about it. And he says, I can think of a couple of examples. If the Egyptians knew the Red Sea was going to drown them, do you think they would have pursued Moses? If you could go back in time to 1941 and tell the radar operators to take a second look at the radar screen on December 7th, would you? Before you say yes and accept that parade in your honor down Main Street, perhaps you should go forward in time and see if the U.S. still had the motivation to make the atom bomb before Hitler did. As far as the war goes, my best advice is to find at least 5 people within 100 miles of you that you trust with your life. I wish he would have gotten a little more detail on that one. But all I can assume is that when the federal police start coming into towns and searching places, you want to be able to pack up, go to your friend's place within 100 miles. And when they start to come in that area, go to your other friend's place close by, 50, 60 miles, whatever. Then when they leave that area, you can go back home. I can only assume that's what he meant. Can you give us some personal stories of your past? Yeah, we already read that one. Already read that one. I don't know how I double pasted some of this stuff and then I go down and there's new stuff. Why do you keep telling us about the war? How do you know that it will happen in our world line? Something may have already changed and it won't happen at all. He said, yes, you are correct. However, I am not confident things are different enough for you to avoid the conflict. You may also consider the possibility that a world with no war is far less desirable in the long run. In response to your other point, your assumptions about casualty are correct, but my personal morality still comes into play. I won't deviate from my 3 rules because of the way I feel about myself. The 3 rules being I'm not going to talk about certain things that are going to happen that would kill somebody by probability or make somebody rich. But I think what he's talking about when he says 2 things. The guy asked him, why do you keep telling us about the war? How do you know that it'll even happen on our world line? Something may have already changed and it won't happen at all. And he says, yes, you are correct, exclamation point. And I think that thing that changed, as he kind of hinted to, was Y2K. So he may say here, yes, you're correct, Y2K is not going to happen. However, I'm not confident things are different enough for you to still avoid the conflict. That's still coming. That's what he's saying, in my opinion. Someone says, John talks about civil war being started between Democrats and Republicans. Later, this escalates into World War III, and he mentions that it's a good thing for us. I don't believe I ever said the war was between Democrats and Republicans. If I am incorrect, please point that out. It doesn't exactly escalate as much as it opens the door for other aggression. Yes, I think the war would be good for society, and I would be happy to debate that with you. And I don't think he gets into that one, but I think I can guess what he might mean. When you look at nature, from animals at the smallest level, mice, rodents, right, up to lions, caribou, elephant, right, all these things, to insects, bees, wasps, caterpillars, and the poor caterpillar that's climbing up a tree to go to a leaf gets swooped up by a wasp that kills him, brings it back to the family. The wasp, on the other hand, happened to have a nest that was built on my back porch, and I sprayed that bastard with some spraying bug killer. In other words, there's a kind of a nature probability thing. And there's nothing here that really takes out humans, right? Everything else, nature has a balance, and it's just eat or be eaten, right? Kill or be killed in the, law of the jungle. Humans, on the other hand, we don't really have someone coming down, predator, killing us. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's a shark attack every now and then, but you know what I mean. So I think what he's saying is war is a good thing for society from time to time. And I think what he's getting at is that it weeds it out a little bit. All these economic problems and job problems and all these, as the elite say, useless eaters would kind of take care of itself if a bunch of people got wiped off the face of the earth, wouldn't it? And I'm assuming, as bad as that sounds, that might be what he means. John tells us to buy a gun, find 5 friends, and get a bicycle. This conflicts with his comments about killing us all off. If you could point out how this violates the 3 guidelines I said earlier, I would give it considerable thought. Perhaps you are correct and that was a mistake. Again, I don't believe I said I want to kill you. Personally, I think murder is wrong. You seem to be pretty good at that yourself. John mentions war between the cities of America, Russia, China. Are you familiar with the Russian partisan movement in World War II? And he replies by saying, are you familiar with the partisan movement in World War II? John says the Civil War leads to the World War in 2015. The Civil War lasts for 10 years. And he replies by saying it's 2004. I apologize for a missed key. Very observant. We all need good critics. Perhaps our definition of war is different. I would define it as a conflict where organized groups engage in maneuver and armed conflict. The first U.S. Civil War lasted 4 years, and the English Civil War lasted 6. So how long is too long? What is the exact date the war starts? If you can't remember, can you tell us the month? I remember the exact date. When it comes, it will not be a surprise. And remember what he said in the other question from yesterday or the day before when I did the videos. When the war comes, it'll be blatantly obvious. There will be no chance that anyone in this country will know any different. It'll be staring you in the face. You'll know it's about to happen. And he says the shocking thing was how many people decided to stay in the city areas, and they already knew that that's probably where the bombs were going to be dropping, and decided we're going to stay anyways. So I don't know what question this was, but he says the animal kingdom is alive and well. I'm sure it suffered, but there are fewer people infringing on animals' habitats now. Nuclear war is a very undesirable thing, but it is not the end of the world. There are areas and cities we can't enter, and the environment did suffer a great deal of damage, but we are recovering. Isn't Hiroshima a thriving city today? The major physical effects include skin cancer, infertility, infection, etc. Almost everyone has some sort of physical remnant from the war. How many states are there? The states as you know them still exist, but their political power has been combined with other states around them. There are now 5 major geopolitical areas in the U.S. Were only cities along the eastern U.S. hit in the nuclear war, or all of the country? And he says cities and large military areas in the entire country were hit. Was a lot of the U.S. age group of 18 to 24 killed in the war because of a draft? Yes. Which countries are on our side in the war? He says, I don't have much to add there. I guess we're on our own. Which country gets the worst in the war? Again, the entire world is affected. Even if you don't take a direct hit, dying crops and no water can ruin your day. Do you feel some pleasure in breathing clean air and not having to check a radiation counter every few miles? Yes, I do. Here, we answered that one already. What exactly happens to the water? He says the radiation affected the water, but that can always be distilled out. There are biological hazards that cannot be distilled out. In addition, fresh water is hard to come by without talking to someone with a gun first. You stated elsewhere that Australia repulses a Chinese invasion. Does that mean Australian government sided with your enemy? There were deep divisions in Australia also. I would associate it more with a powder keg than a civil war. Let me scroll down. What weapons did you use to protect yourself? Do you have any weapons now? I used a shotgun in the war. Yes, I think it's prudent to be prepared for anything. Your enemy was in the cities. Was the president in 2005 also on the enemy side? How did you feel personally about the president then? The president, or leader, he says, in 2005, I believe, tried desperately to be the next Lincoln and hold the country together, but many of their policies drove a larger wedge into the Bill of Rights. The president in 2009 was interested only in keeping his or her power base. So again, when I hear that, president driving a wedge into the Bill of Rights, okay, George Bush, oh my God, and Obama, oh my God, can it get any worse? And if so, the fact that he says the next president, which in this case he said was 2009, was interested only in keeping his or her power base. Now, considering that we only have male presidents, was it even necessary for him to write his/her power base? Normally, no one does that when referring to a president or the future president. It's just the president or him or his. And I know old Hillary, 2016 Hillary. Man, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Old Hillary wins, and she's the one that's just worried about keeping the power base. Was China your enemy? Not my enemy. I never fought any Chinese, but their ability to hit Western cities with missiles made a lot of people unhappy. Does China have a manned space program between 2001 and 2036? I believe they are pretty close to putting a man in orbit. It shouldn't surprise you if they do that soon. And he was right. A couple, 2 or 3 years later, they did in fact put a man in orbit for the first time. The idea of a farmer general leaving his fields to lead his country's troops to victory is an old one. Yes, I often think about that when I see pictures of my farmer general in Omaha. It's a large bronze depiction holding a shotgun in one hand and a copy of the Constitution in the other. He is looking up at the sky in defiance of God after his father was killed. How far from what city is it safest to be? Oh, excuse me. Let me try that again. How far from what size city is the safest to be? A 10 kiloton nuclear weapon will vaporize metal for about half a mile and have a heat effect for about 3 miles. A 100 megaton nuclear weapon will vaporize metal to 35 miles and have a heat effect to about 250 miles. I believe the largest nuclear weapon ever built and tested was about 60 megatons. As I recall, the popular strategy today is to strike targets with multiple numbers of smaller warheads. The 100 kiloton, not megaton, to 1 megaton are the most popular. I believe there are about 150 to 200 major cities in the U.S. and half as many military targets. Please correct me, someone, if I'm grossly incorrect. So his answer is basically that 100 kiloton to 1 megaton are about what we're going to see if this happens. Which is good because, as he said, a 10 kiloton can vaporize metal for about half a mile, have a heat effect about 3 miles. So 10 times that, well, that'd be 100 kiloton. Yeah, even in 1 megaton. Well, he says 100 megaton can do 35 miles, so I'm just trying to think. I'd say a minimum of 10 miles away from any major city. Absolute bare minimum. And I mean dead in the heart of the city, where all the government buildings are, the big buildings, you know. Obviously, that would be where it got hit. Now, the fact that he said he's in an army base in Tampa, Florida, in the future, time travel stuff, I'm going to assume that Tampa area is probably not going to get hit. Should we be stockpiling guns? The answer to this is no. Capital letters, exclamation point, no. You will draw a great deal of negative attention to yourself. I recommend becoming familiar with firearms. This means taking a safety course and learning to shoot and clean many different types of weapons. There will be plenty of guns around when you need them. What kind of people will be the ones least trustworthy? The people with the most to lose if the world changes. Camel through the eye of a needle? Question mark. The people with the most to lose if the world changes will be the least trustworthy. Well, I wonder who that would be. Any politician, any banker, any big top CEO, big shot. That solves that one. We know who that is. Does living near a river take care of water problems? There is an odd saying that might be appropriate here. Safe is anywhere a hungry person can't walk in 3 days. This one is one of the biggest ones that stuck with me in this whole John Titor thing that I remember. There is an odd saying that might be appropriate here. Being safe is anywhere a hungry person cannot walk in 3 days. In other words, from experience, dealing with all that, they now know in the future that under any kind of civil conflict or anything else, you know, World War, all that, someone who is starving and hungry is willing to walk about 3 days before they give up, die, change direction, something. So, unfortunately, I don't really know anywhere that someone couldn't walk in 3 days. I mean, you'd have to be... And again, what is walking in 3 days? Like, how many miles are you doing in 3 days? The average person nowadays, you ain't going to go, they'll go 20 miles and be done. Americans as we are now. So, maybe you don't have to be too far away after all. But that was an interesting comment that just stuck with me forever. How are the 5 people within the 100 miles contacted? Remember that thing he said about your friends. The goal is to have a place to go other than your house and to be able to trust someone with your life. Foster those relationships now. Do communications stay intact during the war? Main communication systems, no. CB, like truck drivers use, CB, sideband, and non-repeating shortwave, yes. Sideband. What is a sideband radio? It's a type of CB, single sideband. I'm just kind of main communication, no, CB sideband and non-repeating shortwave. He doesn't actually say ham radio for some reason, which is odd. B mobile, set aside the things you absolutely would need and can carry on your back. You will not be able to stay anywhere indefinitely, even with provisions and firearms. So what he is saying is, if you've got these 5 groups, 5 people in different areas within 100 miles, like I said earlier, bounce to this guy's house. Okay, we've got activity coming this way. Leave, go to this guy's house. Okay, we're starting to hear activity. They're coming this way. Go to that guy's house, right? To stay away and avoid it. You know, the federal police, as he called it. Okay. Will soldiers be asked to kill their countrymen? I'm not positive, but don't they sign a small piece of paper now asking them if they would have a problem with that? Do you remember any poetry? Yes, and it's not even... I'm not even going to read it. It doesn't matter. Does distillation remove radioactivity from water? It removes the dust and dirt particles that are radioactive. So yes, distillation is good to do. You said that your culture was centered around universities. Weren't they wiped out in the war? Not all major universities are in large cities. How do most people die during the war? His reply, in this order. And this, you need to remember this. And he says that, in this order. Starvation, disease, bullet wounds, and radiation. Most people will starve. The second most people will die of disease, and then bullet wounds, and then radiation. That's interesting. Because you would think if bombs were being dropped, nuclear ones, that would do the most devastation right off the bat. So it shouldn't it say bombs, then starvation, then disease, you know? But if you really think about it, if they are using small nukes to just strategically wipe out small city areas, the government buildings, communications, there's going to be quite a few people left over. But now that the infrastructure is down, you ain't going and getting gasoline, you're not going to the grocery store, the trucks aren't going to be running. Starvation actually does make sense as the first cause of death. Very interesting, isn't it? Oh, JSNIP 4 does have some food storage, and I've always advised people to get that. I used to talk a lot about that, and I haven't in a long time, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you now. Food storage, some way to distill water. I bought one you can plug in, and again, I've got solar panels, so I can run electricity here. If you can't, you can always, steam a pot, cover it to where it catches the steam, and then converts it into dripping water. But you have got to have a way to distill water. You need a good water filter as well. Yes, you'll need a gun. You don't have to go out and go crazy. Silver, he never ever mentions anything about silver and gold. However, I believe silver and gold will skyrocket long before any kind of war like this happens. So you could take advantage of it then, buy all your provisions when you sell that gold and silver, and if this comes later, you will have everything you need. You said there are... You said that your culture was centered around universities. Hang on, wrong place. You said that there will be a big war. Can you at least tell us which cities will be nuked? No, I won't do that. However, I submit to you that when the moment comes, this is the third time he said this, basically. When the moment comes, it will be absolutely plain as day that you are unsafe in the cities. The millions of people that stay and choose to stay. That's what comes as a surprise. Let me scroll down. Nuclear warfare doesn't seem to be the biggest form of fighting in the future. He says nuclear war will be very effective at destroying an enemy's economy and the people's will to fight. Next one, I doubt nuclear warheads are going to be shot from each end of the globe. He says, I would caution against that. That's exactly what they want you to think, while they continue to develop smaller and more accurate MIRVs. Have you ever seen a neutron bomb the size of a basketball? Is what he says. Next question. John, you say one of the hardest things to do in 2036 is find clean water. You also say that you only trust food you've grown. Is any of this a result of your experiences with biological warfare? Yes and no. Yes, biological warfare and accidents do cause a great deal of problems, but the lack of a working infrastructure also hinders the continuation of the food manufacturing you depend on now. Which makes me think what I just said a second ago. How do people die? In this order: starvation, disease, and bullet wounds, and then radiation. Now he just basically answered that. The most likely leader of a war movement like the one you described would most likely be a farmer. He says throughout history, farmers have been a target of oppression because they are absolutely necessary to civilization, but too busy to defend themselves. If you push a farmer too far, they stop growing food and have nothing to do but hide in the woods and shoot back. I always wondered, like, specifically, why did he say that? Does he mean because the government, through Monsanto and everyone else, is cracking down on these farmers, there's hardly any farmers left, so they've had enough and they are going to fight back? Or literally, kind of what he says, if you push a farmer too far, they will stop growing the food and have nothing to do but hide in the woods and shoot back. So how are they pushing the farmer too far? He doesn't answer that, and that remains to be seen. You say you were in a militia fighting the U.S. Army. I would think civilians would have no chance of successfully fighting the military. He says you must realize that why people are fighting is more important than what they are fighting with. The conflict was not about taking and holding ground. It was about order and rights. They were betting that people wanted security instead of freedom, and they were wrong. Let me stop again. Last sentence. I'm going to leave it out just to show you that he didn't have to put that in there. It was not necessary. So why did he say that? You say the militia was fighting the U.S. Army. I would think the civilians would not stand a chance against them. You must realize that why people are fighting is more important than what they are fighting with. The conflict was not about taking and holding ground. It was about order and rights. That makes perfect sense. But he also added, they were betting that people wanted security instead of freedom, and they were wrong. What are we faced with today? Security. And now what's the new thing they're pushing down our throats? Cybersecurity, a big one's coming. I just said it yesterday. Department of Homeland Security on her way out, Mrs. Janet Napolitano, a major cybersecurity attack's coming. Oh, and by the way, an act of nature devastating is also coming. It's in the works or something like that. What? So as you can see, everything that we have to do, every law they got to pass, it's for security, more security, airport security, TSA. We got to snoop. The NSA has to spy on you, security purposes. Oh, we can't reveal those documents. National security. So he said that the government was betting on the people wanting security instead of freedom, and they were wrong. Is it a stalemate with the resistance / militia hiding out until the cities are wiped out, allowing them to surface? The cities were not isolated because of them. They were isolated because of us. Let me think about that. Is it a stalemate with the resistance / militia, which would be John Titor, hiding out until the cities were wiped out, then coming out? And he says the cities were not isolated because of them. They were isolated because of us. Meaning, I guess, that movement of people left the cities. They wanted out of the cities. You cite the approximate number of cities and military bases intact before the nuclear attack. Are they all hit? Nuclear weapons and guidance systems are less than perfect. Most targets received more than one warhead, but some of them were more accurate than others. I would estimate the overall accuracy was around 60 to 70%. So someone asked him, remember about the 3 days. Make sure you're 3 days away from a hungry person, so they can't walk to you in 3 days. Because if they can get to you, they're going to kill you to take what you've got. So make sure you are 3 days away from anyone who had to walk to find you. So they asked, 3 days walk from where? In my experience, a motivated starving person is only capable of walking about 3 days. The more distance you put between yourself and anyone who is likely to be hungry, the better. And again, if the sole reason people die in the coming war is from starvation, it's going to be a lot of people. A lot of people to deal with. Does anyone stay neutral during the war? Some try to, he says. Doesn't work out, I guess. Does anyone lead a normal life during the Civil War? No. What you say the Civil War lasts from 2004 to 2008 and then the short big war in 2015. What do the years from 2008 to 2015 look like? How does World War III, how long does it last? I'm not sure I said that exactly. By 2008, I would say the civil conflict is pretty much at everyone's doorstep. Western instability during the conflict leads to the attack in 2015. World War III is very short, with a longer period of mop-up. You mentioned Canadians, but I don't think you mentioned the impact on that country. There's not a great deal I know about Canada except to say that they were pretty much in the same type of conflict. They did have the DEW line, you know. I don't know what that means. DEW, the DEW line. I must preface the following with a bit of melodrama. I feel a bit unqualified to answer the next few questions for the following reason. The way you and I look at life and death and its relative value is radically different. As any other soldier can tell you, once you watch a man's arm come off from the bullet you just fired, or have been close enough to feel someone's last breath on your face, it changes you. I can only describe it in two distinct waves. The first feeling is power. You won when it counted and survived. All the personal shortcomings and faults you've carried with you your whole life just melt away in a savage euphoria. If there's time to think about it, the next wave comes shortly after and is underlined by overwhelming guilt. You just killed someone, and now God might be ticked off. Fortunately, the second feeling goes away quickly when the shooting starts again and gets shorter and shorter after every battle. After all, why would God put you in this situation? The point is, I personally do not like going through that cycle, and the decisions I make about life and death might not be the ones you would expect me to make. How come it doesn't bother you that people may die through your inaction, yet you find it morally wrong that you might affect lives by active involvement? I'm not sure I said it didn't bother me. I only stated I won't interfere on purpose. Again, I refer to a historical example. Before Pearl Harbor was attacked, in 1941, a small group of U.S. soldiers were experimenting with a new technology called radar. As the Japanese planes were flying toward the island, they actually picked them up in time to thwart the surprise attack. Unfortunately, they were unfamiliar with the equipment and figured it wasn't working correctly. As you are aware, the ruthlessness of the Japanese sneak attack galvanized the U.S. people into entering World War II. As a time traveler, it would be easy for me to take a short hike up that hill where the radar operators were and point out to them that indeed the equipment was working just fine and that they should probably call it in. Assuming they believed me, it is arguable that my lone single action could start a chain of events that would allow the U.S. to meet the Japanese planes and stop them from attacking the battleships. As a result, the U.S. people would still be angry but not motivated to enter the war fully, since the Japanese were not a perceived threat. Thus, you don't begin research on the atomic bomb, America, until well after Hitler already has dropped a couple on London. I could save thousands of men on the Arizona. I could save thousands of men on the Arizona, the ship, at the cost of millions in London. I just don't know how one life will affect another. However, if I were standing next to a soldier who was about to be shot by a passing Japanese plane, I would push him to safety. I realize this is inconsistent on a small scale, but I am tired of watching people die in front of me. If there is a price to pay for that, then so be it. Let me just stop for a second and just ask you. I know this all sounds crazy and everything. How in the hell can somebody come on the internet in the year 99, 2000, 2001 saying these kind of things with this type of detail and just complete unbelievable thought? It's baffling. Isn't it just as wrong to affect lives through inaction as it is through action? Why are you concerned about what I might do to corrupt your world line when you have no problem letting other people do it around you every day? Do you blame yourself for not taking any action right now to save people living on your streets or suffering from poverty and disease? Besides, how exactly would you propose I decide who to tell and who not to tell, provided I knew anything anyways? Your immediate decision in itself is its own authority. He says, what God judges about my decision is the only authority. Again, all the things you claim I can do, you are capable of also. If good and evil achieve a balance in the larger picture, the question of you being required to decide who lives or dies is moot. It's not moot to me. To tell you the truth, I'm afraid. I don't want the responsibility of being expected to know who lives and who dies. I know it would change me for the worst. Besides, how can you be sure my inaction now isn't a result of something I've already screwed up and I'm trying to fix it? Javier might be right after all. Thanks for the good questions. Again, is he talking about Y2K? He fixed Y2K. Maybe he shouldn't have, because now the civil conflict's not going to start in 2004 because we're not going to have all these computer problems right away. Right? Possibility. I would still like to know what population makes a big city. Cities become targets because of their military and economic value. Any large area supported by a civil infrastructure is likely to be on that list. So again, I read that and say, well, Tampa probably is on the list. But if Tampa was on the list and it got hit by nukes, it would be radioactive when he was going there in 2036 to drive this, whatever, get this time machine, and that's where he's stationed out of. And if he's also going up and down the west coast of Florida, well, that's going right by that. I mean, the base is right there on the Gulf. So, again, I don't know. I can't even speculate, really. Your time sounds grim. Are you tempted to finish your mission and then retire into the 1970s? Not at all. I'm anxious to get home. Do they start pushing for legalization earlier than the war? It's not really an issue of the government letting you do something. It's more like they have other things to worry about. Don't you feel you are capable of taking care of yourself? If you want to take mood-altering drugs, why should my opinion stop you from that? They don't stop you from taking alcohol, tobacco, or fast food. In any case, it also lets Darwin take over. One of the reasons drug abuse isn't a major problem in 2036 is because no one wants to die from it, and everyone else who did is already dead. Someone asked him about the Waco thing he talked about. Waco with criminal violations of the law either directly or impliedly, as is done in this video, simply doesn't accord with the real facts. So I guess they sent him a video to watch about Waco. And he says, a large point of contention seems to be the flashes of light that appear to be gunfire that were recorded from the aircraft flying over the compound. The FBI has stated that these flashes were sunlight reflections. I find that rather interesting since the camera was not a visible light camera. It was a thermal camera. If the federal forces learned anything from Waco, it was to install more reliable suppressors on their automatic weapons and don't use flash grenades that leave shell casings after they fire. What college did you attend? What year did you graduate? I was educated at the University of Florida. I entered a military-sponsored program in 2029 and graduated between 2033 and 34. No, it was not very similar. You see a time machine. I see a weapon system. Yes, I suppose that is one thing you could do with it. I could also cut my hand off with the power saw or heat up a crowd of people with a microwave. However, I believe Teller already came up with an X-ray laser that destroys itself after going off. This is an interesting statement. I could cut my hand off with the power saw or heat up a crowd of people with a microwave. You remember those LRAD things that do that? You know, they point this loud thing. Now they've got something that can make you uncomfortable. They can heat you up. That's new technology. That stuff wasn't going around in his time here in 2000. I mean, now they have these things mounted on vehicles, you know, SWAT vehicles and things. So it's interesting that he used that as an example. X-rays will be emitted if matter is pumped into the device. Actually, I thought we were focusing on the degree of radiation and temperature. I don't believe I ever said it didn't give off radiation. Yes, the device does give off X-rays. He sends him a drawing. The drawing indicates in detail number 5, X-ray venting zone. It details X-rays being focused and vented directionally. It has applications as a weapon system. And he says, as you said, it's interesting that I see a time machine and you see a weapon. Maybe it's a sign of the times. However, it's a good point. If the Chinese or Russians thought you had one of these, what do you think they would do? And I don't know if he is going on to answer more questions, but he says, again, maybe you should ask yourself if you're sure you want me to prove I'm a time traveler. Maybe that's what makes a time traveler evil, and that he would be willing to share everything with you. A while ago, on one of the posts, I related an experience I had with my parents while we were driving down the highway. Every now and then we would pass someone who was in obvious distress with their vehicle. I was amazed that so many people could drive by without stopping to help. Their explanation was fear. The risk of helping someone was too great, and with today's technology they probably had a cell phone anyways. And if they didn't, the walk to a gas station would be good for them and teach them a lesson for running out of gas. The example is the plight of the homeless. When you pass them as individuals on the street, I see the way people selectively choose an alternate path to avoid them. Those two examples best define why time travelers do not show themselves. In trying to help you, we put ourselves at great risk, and there's no point to it, really. We know the nature of time dictates that traveling between exact world lines is impossible. Therefore, the only results we will see will be the ones we stay to see. Since world lines, outcomes, and events are infinite, we have better things to do. When I arrive in the new 1998 world line on my way home, I could easily start all of this again and continue to go through the same conversations with all the same people. However, I already know you won't pay attention or believe me because we've already been through it on this world line. Besides, I think the walk to the gas station would do you some good. He has got some awesome sarcasm. The following are the last questions I saw before my going home post. I apologize for not being able to get to all of them. And I'm getting close to the end, so I'm going to finish this right now. One last question. How did Texas fare during the war? Texas is still there, but Spanish is a lot more popular. What would prevent us, the enemy state, from returning the machine to 2036 with a suitcase nuclear device? This is the second time I've seen a reference to the unit as a weapon. I would submit that the people of this world line have nothing to fear from me. What would you do with the unit? In your opinion, what is the smallest mass that can form a singularity? Even Hawking suggested primordial singularities were created at the Big Bang. Were there planets or half-planets around to form them then? Based on your ability to draw conclusions about someone's profile from their typed words, I find it hard to believe you would make such errors in the syntax and meaning of the exact same words. Unfortunately, you have now maneuvered yourself into a position where I have the last word, and our debate has come to an end. Boomer isn't a bad name, and I sort of like it. Thanks. Can you explain what the purpose... already did that one. What time do they visit the most? 1960 to 1980. Why did you go to 1975? The first leg of my trip was from 2036 to 1975. After 2 VGL checks, the divergence was estimated at about 2.5% percentage from his world line in 2036. I was sent to get an IBM computer system called the 5100. It was one of the first portable computers made, and it has the ability to read the older IBM programming languages in addition to APL and BASIC. We need the system to debug various legacy computer programs in 2036. Unix has a problem in 2038. So that's why they're doing it in 2036. On my world line, it is known that the 5100 series is capable of reading all the IBM code written before the widespread use of APL and BASIC. Unfortunately, there are none left that anyone can find on my world line. Technologies themselves are not lost, but some of the older tools and techniques have been lost. I think there is more detailed information about the war posted earlier. When I leave, I will return to 2036. The computer I have is expected there. Earlier you said something was wrong with the Unix computer code on your world line. What's wrong with it? Yes, and with yours too. I have to believe there must be a Unix expert out there someplace that can confirm that. I'm not exactly sure what the technical issue is, but I believe some sort of Unix system registry that stops in 2038. Again, there has been verification that there is an issue. I can't remember right now, and I didn't go look on the internet about it, but I already did the research back in the day when I was reading this, and it is true. I have a working IBM 5160 computer. Maybe I should stash it away for 30 years and see what happens. He says toss it. The 5100, not the 5160. The 5100 is the interesting machine. As far as evidence goes, I have, however, decided to try an experiment with you that may be more convincing. It involves the travel of information at faster than light. In fact, I have dropped at least 3 little gems like this that no one else has picked up on. And the host or whatever says, what other gems has he dropped that no one picked up on? You said you are confused by the 5100, and this is John Titor again. You said you are confused by the 5100 story. I will explain further. In 2036, it was discovered, or at least known after testing, that the 5100 computer was capable of reading and changing all of the legacy code written by IBM before the release of that system, and still be able to create new code in APL and BASIC. That is the reason we need it in 2036. However, IBM never published that information because it would probably destroyed a large part of their business infrastructure in the early 70s. In fact, I would bet the engineers were probably told to keep their mouths shut. Therefore, if I were not here now telling you this, that information would not be discovered for another 36 years. Yet, I would be there, or yet I would bet there is someone out there who can do research and discover I am telling the truth right now. There must be an older IBM engineer out there, someplace, that worked on the 5100. They just might not have ever asked if I hadn't pointed it out, and he is correct. And they found one, and he absolutely agreed, yes, this is a secret thing that this little machine can do that nobody ever knew about. It was never published. Confirmed. How big is the IBM 5100? I would say it's about 20 inches long, 10 inches high, and 30 inches. Well, he says long again. Maybe he meant wide. What do they look for when choosing someone for a mission? Depending on the mission, time travelers are usually chosen for a particular mission based on their ability to gain the cooperation of someone related to the goal on the target world line. In my case, my grandfather was directly involved with the building and programming of the 5100. It would seem then that another time traveler that looks like you could arrive on your world line of origin with another IBM 5100 and no one would know the difference. And he says, bingo! Seems like something they would do a lot of psychological testing for before they send us off. What's the use of bringing back the computer to a slightly different world line, since you know there are just as many world lines in which no one returns to bring back the computer? The 5100 had a very simple and unique feature that IBM did not account for and decided it was not in their best interest to advertise, which in hindsight was not very smart. This accidental feature was thus removed from any future desktop computers. In order to take advantage of this feature, the 5100 I have now required a couple of special tweaks that had to be done by one of the software engineers in 1975. Anyone who is familiar with this feature and was told to keep their mouth shut about it will be able to tell you what it is. Again, this was verified. The computer is from 1975, Rochester, Minnesota. Based on what I know about the 5100, it has a very few interesting and worthwhile properties that makes it worthwhile for a time traveler to recover. Also, please keep in mind that civilization is recovering from a war. Yes, we do have the technology, but many of the tools were lost. As you are probably aware, Unix will have a timeout error in 2038, and many of the mainframe systems that ran a large part of the infrastructure were based on very old IBM computer code. The 5100 has the ability to easily translate between the old IBM code, APL, BASIC, and with a few tweaks that were done in 1975, he says, Unix. This may seem insignificant, but the fact that the 5100 is portable means I can easily take it back to 2036. I do expect they will create some sort of emulation systems to use in multiple locations. I do believe that your Unix will also have a problem in 2038. I don't think that's a secret, but maybe someone should put a 51 aside for 30 years or so. Yes, EMP took out a great number of electronic devices. That's one of the reasons why we don't have reliable technology laying around. However, in the opening hours of Nuclear Day, the Russians did not launch any high-altitude detonations. They knew we would most likely clean up after them, so they wanted everyone outside the cities to be able to communicate. Most of the warheads that hit the cities came in threes and exploded close to the ground. The heavy EMP damage was isolated to those areas. I find it hard to believe that a software tweak done to a 1975 machine would be enough to justify a time travel mission. Ah, something we have in common. Yes, I felt that way too. However, my job was to go and get it and not debate why they wanted it. I am not a computer expert. A great deal of the computer infrastructure you depend on is based on very old systems and code. One of the reasons I was sent to 1975 was because of the person I met there, not the technology. There are more effective ways to accomplish what you claim in this regard. Whatever, next. Now that's the end of it right now. So I'm going to end this video. I do have a little more to add that I think I'll add in the final series, which will be tomorrow. And then we will close out the John Titor case. Take care.